Hi everyone, I am recording in the stairwell outside my flat today because there's loads of construction work going on, and touch wood, touch the banister. This is a quiet space to film, so fingers crossed. If you're new to this channel, my name is Jen. Hi, I am an author, a book reviewer and disability advocate. The AdSense from this video I'm going to be donating to Fight for Right, which is a Ukrainian organisation run by disabled people, and at the moment they have an emergency crowd funding page where they are raising money to help disabled people who are trying to flee the Ukraine or disabled people who are trying to stay as safely as possible and get supplies to them. I am anticipating how much the AdSense will be, so I've already donated that so that it can help now. I will also link in the description box down below the page if you would like to go and donate yourself. And of course I'm sending so much love to everybody. On the subject of disability, today I wanted to make a video which is a follow-up video to a video that I made in late 2018, so just over 3 years ago, and I can't believe it's been that long. It really doesn't feel like it, and I've been meaning to make this video for ages, thinking, oh, I'll just wait a little bit longer, and suddenly now it's 3 years later. So 3 years ago I made a video where I talked about all of the books I could remember reading that had disability and disfigurement rep, whether I liked them, whether I didn't like them, and then talked about books that were also on my TBR with those themes. I have since done videos talking about disability books, but not a huge video like that one, so that's what I'm going to do today. In this video I'm going to talk about any of the books that I'd hauled and were on my TBR in that video that I've since read. The books I haven't read we won't talk about, and we'll talk about those in a future video once I've read them. I also will talk about books that I have bought and read since that video, and then I'll also talk about books that are on my TBR as well. I'm going to be recommending and showing you over 100 books in this video, and I'm going to bring them out in piles so that I'm not just cluttering up the corridor, and I will list them in the description box down below. Please also see the pinned comment as well, because I think as word count is restricted in the description box, it's going to go into a comment as well. Most of the books I'm going to talk about today are by Own Voices disabled creatives. I think that's really important because, well, there are many reasons. One, minority voices are often silenced and concerns aren't listened to. So politically, I think it's really important to support Own Voices writers. But also, in my experience, that's where the best stories are, because they're coming from a place of true understanding as well as great creativity and imagination. So there are exceptions to this, and I do have some books that I'm going to be showing you today that are by non-disabled writers, but that's the point that I'm coming from as a disabled person, as a disabled author myself. And if you are new to my channel, I've written 10 books for adults and kids across lots of different genres, but these three in particular touch on disability and disfigurement. I've also made videos about disability and disfigurement, which I'll link in the description box down below. This is The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night, which is a short story collection for grown-ups. It's inspired by fairy tales and the act of storytelling itself, full of magical realism, ghosts in jam jars, nighttime aquariums. This is The Girl Aquarium, which is a poetry collection also for grown-ups, which is about girlhood and changing bodies, disability, the history of the freak show. And my most recent book is The Sister Who Ate Her Brothers. And why did I forget that? The Sister Who Ate Her Brothers and Other Gruesome Tales. Promise I do remember the title. Promise I wrote this book. This is illustrated by Adam D'Souza, a middle grade book, which is 14 fairy tales from around the world retold, which dissects the disfigurement villainy trope and how harmful that is, and also has positive queer and disfigurement and disability rep in it as well. So those are three of my books. Let us begin. I have brought a handful of books out here, and we're going to start with the books that I have read since making that video, and these are in no particular order. So first off, we have The Ice Bear Miracle by Burnell. Burnell is a TV presenter as well as a writer, and this is a middle grade book about a boy called Marv, yes, who was attacked by a polar bear when he was a baby, so he has a facial disfigurement, and this is a magical book about his love of hockey and ice and polar bears, and I'm not going to say more than that. Then actually I have 3 books that I'm currently reading that have been sitting on my bedside table for a while, and I've been working my way slowly through them. This is Growing Up Disabled in Australia, edited by Findlay. This is a collection of essays by many different disabled writers. It's brilliant. This is an anthology of poetry published by the Emma Press called The Anthology of Illness. And then this is a book by Jarman, which is about his love of colour. It's a memoir talking about him losing his sight. I should also say that Disability Readathon is something that happens in April. It's not something that I run, but it's something that I love taking part in. So hopefully this video should give you inspiration of books you may want to pick up then or at any time. We've got 3 books here by Elle McNicoll, who's an Own Voices neurodivergent writer. Her first book was A Kind of Spark. All of these are middle grade. Did I say that? This one is about a girl called Addie who really wants to set up a plaque in her local village to commemorate people who were murdered in the name of witchcraft historically and stand up for people who are ostracised from society by not fitting into the box that a neurotypical society would like people to fit into. This is really great. My favourite of her 3 books is Show Us Who You Are, which is about AIs and eugenics, and it got me in the feels. And her most recent one is this, which has a protagonist called Ramya who's dyspraxic and lives in Edinburgh, and this is a fantasy novel which is a lot of fun. And if you've ever been to Edinburgh, I lived there for 4 years, you can just see that it's a great place to set a fantasy novel. I've read 3 poetry collections by Raymond, Antrobus, who is one of my favourite poets. I did a podcast with Ray, which I'll link in the description box down below. Ray's poetry discusses identity, deafness, race, family, connection, miscommunication, and all of them are brilliant. My favourite of his is called The Perseverance. This is another poetry collection by Hodgson, which is called Where I'd Watch Plastic Trees Not Grow. It's published by Verve Poetry Press. She has a full-length poetry collection coming out really soon, which I'm very excited about. I also really enjoyed her collection Dear Body. This particular pamphlet is about one specific stay in hospital, and my favourite poem in here is called Bad News, and the first line is, "Doctors transform into poets as they deliver bad news," and I just adore the imagery in that. Amanda Leduc is someone who shares very similar interests with me. If you have read my books or watched my series on the history of fairy tales, you will enjoy this because we are enthralled by very similar topics. In fact, she reached out to me when she was writing this book because she had been watching my videos on the history of fairy tales. This book is part memoir, essay collection, talking about her experience of having cerebral palsy and looking at disability not only in fairy tales but in media in general, and how that influences the way that society thinks about disability. It is great. Some magazines that I have bought and read since that last video. We have Ache magazine, which focuses on the body, chronic illness in particular, and then we have Sick magazine. So this is issue 2 and this one is issue 3. I actually have a piece of writing in issue 3 myself. Again, these are collections of writing and artwork by disabled and chronically ill people. Very much recommend, check them out. 2 poetry pamphlets here. We've got Polly Atkins with Invisible Rain. I have a full-length poetry collection by her and a non-fiction book by her sitting on my shelf, which I'll show you in a bit. So this is a very short collection. I think it's only about 25 pages. And a lot of this is nature writing along with disability writing, with a focus on Dorothy Wordsworth, who was William Wordsworth's sister, which is also the subject of her non-fiction book. Then this is Tracked by Jane Hartstrom. And this is a collection of poetry about having a stoma. It's a really honest, frank collection of poetry. And if you're not particularly into poetry, I think that you would enjoy this because it's very, very accessible to read. Then we have a couple of picture books, 3 picture books here. This is another book by Ray Antrobus, the poet who I mentioned before. This is Can Bears Ski and it's illustrated by Polly Dunbar. And both of these creators are disabled, and it's very rare to actually have a book that is both illustrated and written by disabled people. So this is great. So this is another book about being deaf, and in this case about a little bear who has to get hearing aids because he doesn't realise that he is mishearing things that his dad is saying to him. He keeps thinking that people are saying to him, "Can bears ski?" And it's creating all these wonderful images in his head, but then he realises that's not actually what people are saying to him. This book is by a Paralympian gold medalist called Claire Cashmore, and this is about swimming with a limb difference. The book is called Splash, and it is based on her life as a kid learning to love swimming. Then we've got this picture book called What Happened to You by James Catchpole, illustrated by Karen George, which is all about why you shouldn't ask disabled people what is wrong with them. It's about a kid called Joe who just wants to play at the playground, but he keeps getting distracted and making up stories for why he happens to have one leg, because everybody wants to know the answer to that question when they don't actually need to know in order to play with him. I've got 3 graphic novels / memoirs here. So this is A Puff of Smoke by Sarah Lepet. This is a graphic memoir, and it's talking about her experience of having a dual life, which I very much understand, of being at school and also being in hospital a lot of the time. And when you're in either of those places, you're kind of pretending that the other half of your life doesn't exist, and how disorientating that is. I really wish I had had that book when I was younger. This is Elle Defo by Cece Bell. This again is a graphic memoir, and it's about Cece getting hearing aids. And I really enjoyed this book. I didn't love the way that it was marketed, but that is not Cece's fault. The way that lots of hearing people were speaking about it was slightly infuriating, but the book itself is brilliant. And then this is The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill, which is just in general a very diverse series of graphic novels that I would recommend. It has disability representation, it has queer representation as well, and it's just like a big warm hug, and I just love it very much. A little out of breath because I just went and grabbed another pile of books. All right, we have some more poetry here. So Ultimatum Orangutan by Karani Baraka is a collection of poetry that looks at disability, chronic pain, climate crisis, and colonialism. There's a lot to unpack in here. I reviewed it recently along with all of this year's long-listed Barbellion Prize books, so I'll link that video down below. And likewise, sorry, still out of breath, Barney Kapil's poetry also is about racism, diaspora, and disability in the body. And this is How to Wash a Heart, and this one is Schizophrene. How to Wash a Heart is my favourite of their books. Speaking of the Barbellion Prize, let me talk to you about the other books from that long list that I read. This is Jan Gru's I Live a Life Like Yours, which is a memoir translated from the Norwegian by B.L. Crook. This looks at the impossibility of writing the self, along with ableism just in general, but also within academia and the workplace. My favourite from this year's Barbellion Prize was Eleanor Knows by Claudia Pinheiro, which is translated from the Spanish by Frances Riddle. This is a novel, it's kind of a parody crime novel about a woman who is trying to work out why her daughter died. And this is written using QuickTime, so it's split into sections depending on the tablets that she's taken, because the narrator, Eleanor, has Parkinson's, and it is the most amazing book. What Willow Says by Lynn Buckle was the winner of the Barbellion Prize and was my personal second favourite from this year's long list. This is a brilliant novel about a grandmother and a granddaughter, them exploring communication and deafness and sign language within a forest, and how the trees look like they're signing sometimes, and it's just so exquisite. This is Ill Feelings by Alice Hattrick, which is a wonderful non-fiction book looking at the history of ME. This is A Still Life by Josie George, which is a memoir looking at parenthood and friendship and chronic illness. And then the other book that was longlisted this year was Duck Feet by Eli Percy, which I didn't love, but it was just a personal taste thing. But if you are in the mood for a long novel written in Scots dialect by a neurodivergent writer about school life, then definitely check out that novel as well. I will link my video where I talk about all of those books in the description box down below. Next we have The Sea Women. This is a novel that's coming out in the summer by Chloe Timms, who is a disabled author. This is a novel for grown-ups, and it's about a young girl called Esther who has burn scars, and we follow her life from a child into young adulthood as she lives on this oppressive island controlled by the church. And there's rumours that sea women or selkies live in the nearby water. In a similar vein, in the sense that this is also a book that has a protagonist who has a facial disfigurement, it's also set by the sea, and it has mermaid energy. This is The Secret of Haven Point by Lisette Orton, and Lisette is another author after my own heart because she's from the northeast of England, which is where I'm from, and I loved reading this book for that reason. It has settings I'm very familiar with, and again, I just wish I had read this book when I was younger. This is a novel which has a young girl called Alpha Lux in it, and she lives in a lighthouse with lots of other disabled friends, and they are kind of separate from the real world, and they call themselves Recklings. They work with mermaids to take food from nearby ships and basically just have a very fun existence to read about, but then something comes along to disrupt their lives. This is a poetry collection called Lumen by Tiffany Atkinson, and one of the poems in here talks about pain in such a brilliant way. Let me just quickly share that. In the house, the pain hung like laundry from each edge. You could walk in and feel it flap against your face. It was thick in some corners like meat, and there was nowhere else to put it. Piranesi is a brilliant book that I'm sure you've heard loads of people talk about because it won the Women's Prize last year. It's a magic book about someone called Piranesi who lives in this endless house that's basically a universe where clouds hang around the ceilings and seas sweep through the hall. And Susanna Clarke herself has a chronic illness, and I think it's really fascinating to think about the themes and the imagery in this book in relation to crypt time. I will link an article that I wrote about Piranesi in the description box down below. As well as being an author and book reviewer, I'm also an editor, so I work freelance with authors on their books, and sometimes that relates to disability. So it may be that authors need help with a particular topic if they don't have first-hand experience of that. So I have 2 books here that I've worked on in that respect previously that I wanted to recommend. This one is The Circus of Wonders by Elizabeth McNicoll. Elizabeth is fantastic, and this is a novel about a woman called Nell. Set in Victorian times, Nell has birthmarks all over her body, and her father sells her into the circus. And this is The Boy with Wings by Lenny Henry. Lenny Henry is a comedian. This is his first novel for children. It's a middle grade book about a boy called Tunde who, spoiler, as you can tell from the cover and the title, sprouts wings. And he has a large group of friends, and his friend Kylie happens to be disabled as well. I would really recommend the audiobook of this because Lenny is the best at doing audiobooks. Then I would recommend The Red Room by Nikki French. I love Nikki French, you know this, we all know this. This, I think, is my favourite standalone of theirs. One, because it reminds me of the Frida Klein books. I think that the protagonist, Kit Quinn, was like a precursor to Frida Klein. She's very similar in many ways, but also Kit has a facial disfigurement, and the incident which gave her the facial disfigurement is discussed in this, and then society's reaction to her afterwards is also part of the plot, and I think it's handled really, really well. A non-fiction book I read last year was Gargoyles by Harriet Mercer. This is about her spending a lot of time in hospital 6 weeks after her 40th birthday when she was struck by this mysterious illness and she didn't know if she was going to get better. And it's about hallucination, and it's about the complex nature of time when you're in hospital, along with pain and just adjusting to the way that your body behaves, or in some cases doesn't behave, and how society does or doesn't behave as well. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I also interviewed Harriet, and if that interview is still available, I'll also link that down below. This is a graphic novel which is part of DC called The Oracle Code by Marika Nijkamp, and this is a brilliant, creepy book about a rehabilitation centre where the main character is sent after an accident, where she meets lots of disabled characters and has to not really solve a mystery, but get to the bottom of something strange that is happening in this place. And it has this brilliant creepy element. It has a story within a story which has folklore themes, which is always something that I appreciate. Then, I forgot to talk about this when I was talking about the Barbellion Prize earlier. This is The Coward by Jared McGuinness. Sorry, Jared. This is a novel that is heavily inspired by Jared's real life when he became a wheelchair user after a car accident. And it is a family saga split over 2 different time periods. And again, like most of the books on the Barbellion Prize long list, I just really, really enjoyed it. And again, the video where I talked about this book and all the others will be linked in the description box down below. This is The Grey House by Miriam Petrosian, and it's translated from the Russian by Yuri Machkova. And this book I've decided I am going to part ways with. Sorry, my leg is going to sleep. Let me just move. This is an epic fantasy book about a house where lots of disabled kids live. And I started reading the beginning of this. I talked about it recently in a video, and I really like the magical elements in this, but I'm not a huge fan of the way that disability is spoken about. It's not an own voices book, and I have spoken to other disabled readers about their experience of this book if they happen to have read it, and Everyone that I have spoken to has said that this book made them feel really uncomfortable. Some of them also liked a lot of things about this book, but the language about disability made them feel uncomfortable. And at the other end of the scale, there were many disabled readers who said that they felt that this book was exploitative. So I think I'm going to part ways with this because I didn't really love it. It also made me feel uncomfortable. And as you can tell by this video, there are so many other books that I would like to get to. So that one is not for me, but two that are for me before we move on to books that are on my TBR. We've got Disability Visibility, edited by Alice Wong, which, like Growing Up Disabled in Australia, is a collection of essays by many different disabled writers. And this is Sitting Pretty by Rebecca Tausig, which is probably the book, along with Disability Visibility, that I would recommend the most to readers who want to learn more about disability in general and disability writing, criplit and non-fiction. These are brilliant. Rebecca is just an absolute gem. Okay, actually, before we get on to books that are on my TBR, I did make a list of all the books about disability that I have read since that last video, and some of them I haven't kept. So let me find the ones that are no longer on my shelves so that I can tell you about them, and I will insert covers here. So there's Constellations by Sinead Gleason, which I really enjoyed. It's an essay collection about chronic illness, but I just didn't think I was going to reread it, so I passed it on to someone else, but I would recommend that one. Fire Girl by Tony Abbott is a book that I would absolutely not recommend. It's not by a disabled writer, and it's a very toxic book which centres the experience of a non-disabled boy who's trying to come to terms with Jessica, who's a girl who's come into his class who has burn scars, and there's a lot of focus on how like grossed out he is by her, and the only way that he can identify with her as a person is when he sees a photo of her before she was burned. So no to that one, but I'm mentioning it because I had included it on my TBR in my previous video, and I just want to say I have been there now and I would not recommend it. Patience by Bettina Judd is a poetry collection which I would recommend. The Alarming Palsy of James Orr is not a book that I would recommend. Again, not own voices. This is about a man who has Bell's palsy, and it could have been really interesting, but there was just a theme throughout about how now he had Bell's palsy, he felt really aggressive and wanted to assault his wife, which was a strange angle. Didn't like it. Dancing After 10 is a brilliant graphic memoir, which I swear I do still have, I just couldn't find it. And like with Campbell, Ski, it is a great duo of a disabled author and illustrator. It's about the author's time on holiday where she became extremely, extremely ill, and it's about her navigating that. And it will also infuriate you the way that people responded to her. Like, she was on holiday with her boyfriend and her boyfriend just left her. I'm still angry about it. And I read that book quite a long time ago, angry about it. Chattering by Louise Stern is an own voices book, a collection of short stories featuring deaf protagonists. I didn't enjoy the storytelling in it, it just wasn't for me, unfortunately. Sanatorium by Abby Palmer is an experimental non-fiction book that is very poetic, which I very much enjoyed. And again, I'm pretty sure that I have it on my shelf, but I couldn't buy it. Many Different Kinds of Love by Michael Rosen is kind of about disability, I suppose more chronic illness. It's his experience of having COVID, which meant that he became deaf in one ear and blind in one eye. I'm not sure if that is still the case, but he wrote the book when he was still experiencing those things, and it's about his time in hospital and being really ill, and I just thought it was a great love letter to the NHS, and you know, I would recommend that one. A Room Called Earth by Madeline Ryan is an own voices autistic book, and it's a novel about a main character who's getting ready to go to a party. The whole novel is set on this one night, and I actually didn't love the book as much as I'd hoped to because I'd heard amazing things about it, but it is a novel that I often think about, which is interesting. Modern Medicine by Lucy Hurst is a very small poetry pamphlet which I enjoy, and I'm looking forward to seeing what she writes next. And I think that's all of the books that I didn't have in physical form. So let me put these books back in the flat and grab a pile of books so I can talk to you about things that are on my TBR. So now we are on to books that I bought since the last video but haven't read yet. I can't say I recommend them because I haven't read them yet, but I will be reading and reviewing them over the coming months, years, so stay tuned. And in the meantime, if any of these pique your interest, Google them, see if you want to check them out yourself, and I will whiz through these. One, because I haven't read them so I don't have loads to say, and two, I think this video is probably going to be really long. First off, we have some anthologies that I haven't even hauled yet. These two are related to each other. This is Defying Doomsday and this is Rebuilding Tomorrow. Defying Doomsday imagines lots of different scenarios where there's an apocalypse and it centers disabled characters and how they would react and act and save the day. And then this is Rebuilding Tomorrow, which imagines disabled people rebuilding the world we live in after an apocalypse. And yes. In a similar vein, we have Accessing the Future, which is an anthology edited by Catherine Allen and Jibril Al-Ayad, and it is a disability-themed speculative fiction anthology. Yes, please, thank you very much. This anthology is called What Meets the Eye, The Deaf Perspective, edited by Lisa Kelly and Sophie Stone. This is a collection of poems, short stories and script by UK deaf and hard of hearing folk. And I primarily picked this up because it has a piece in by Lynn Buckle, who wrote What Willow Says. On Being Ill is a new anthology with work by disabled and chronically ill writers. I think primarily writing an essay in answer to Virginia Woolf's essay on being ill, but it also has an extract from Audre Lorde's The Cancer Journals in here as well. Then Suture by Nick Brewer. I'm not sure if this is an Own Voices book, but this definitely uses metaphors to do with body and disability. It says, to make her films, Eva must take out her eyes and use them as batteries. To make her art, Finn must cut open her chest and remove her lungs and heart. To write her novels, Grace must use her blood to power the word processor. So this is called, did I say Suture by Nick Brewer? This is a short story collection. Another short story collection, this is an anthology called Outsiders, edited by Alice Slater. This is published by Three of Cups Press, and this explores what outsider means to different writers, and it includes a short story by me called Miss Juniper's Academy for Wild Girls, which has a protagonist who has a disfigurement. Then we have a couple more anthologies. This is Firsts, coming of age stories by people with disabilities. I think the title says what that is. It is real life stories by disabled people. This is Artificial Divide, edited by Robert Kingett and Randy Lacey, and this is a collection of fiction by visually impaired and blind writers. I have Dara McNulty's book, Diary of a Young Naturalist, which I'm so looking forward to reading. It's a memoir of his and it's about nature and being autistic, and I've only heard brilliant things. We've got Beastery by Kei Ming Chang, which I've been meaning to read for ages. It's a family saga, and I'm pretty sure that it features disfigurement, and I think this is Own Voices as well. I've got another middle grade novel by Kerry Burnell. This is The Girl with the Shark's Teeth. I'm not sure what disability is in here, but it does feature mermaids, which is always a plus. Two novels here for grown-ups. We have got This Is Our Undoing by Lorraine Wilson, which is set in a post-apocalyptic future where a biologist is living with her sister who is disabled, and she's living outside of London State, and it's about climate crisis, and I'm really intrigued by that. And then this is Sandra Gale Lambert's The River's Memory, which I think has magical realism in it. It says, a woman born without legs spends her days swimming with manatees. Two artists separated by centuries guide each other's hands, and a child of the Florida frontier sits on the graves of her siblings to think about race relations and the habitats of caterpillars. This is Monster Human by Kirsty A. Skonsvold, who's one of my favourite Norwegian writers. It's a non-fiction book about when she was 17 and she was very ill, and she was sent to a nursing home to recuperate because she couldn't move, and it's about the strange time that she had there. This is another book by Marika Nijkamp, who I mentioned before. This is At the End of Everything. The world never wanted them. They refused to be forgotten. This is a YA novel about the Hope Juvenile Treatment Centre. The end of the world happens, and it's this group of disabled kids who are left to fight for themselves, which is giving me Defying Doomsday vibes, which I mentioned previously. A few poetry collections. Firstly, this is a literary journal called Bedzine, where disabled and chronically ill people write about their relationship with their beds or draw about it. We have The Book of Goodbyes by Gillian Wise, which I bought because I really liked their essay on disability visibility. I think it was in that book. Veil and Burn by Laurie Clements Lambeth. Phantom Pains by Therese Estacion. The Carrying by Ada Limon, Much with Body by Polly Atkin, and A Place More Hospitable by Jason Purcell, who also used to have a booktube channel. I'm not sure that they do anymore, but they also have a full-length poetry collection coming out soon. I know I whizzed through those titles, but you can Google them and see if you can read samples online. I think that's always the best way to decide whether or not a poet is for you. And then we have some non-fiction books. I think these are mostly non-fiction. So we've got another Polly Atkin book. This is Recovering Dorothy, which is about Dorothy Wordsworth and her final 20 years of her life when she mostly was in her house and was dealing with chronic illness. We've got Notes Made While Falling by Jen Ashworth. It says it's a genre-bending memoir and a cultural study of traumatized and sickened selves in fiction and film. I've read her novels before and really enjoyed them, and I haven't read her non-fiction before. A Face for Picasso by Ariel Henley is a memoir about facial disfigurement, and Ariel's essay was one of my favorites in Disability Visibility, along with Harriet McBride Johnson. I've also bought her book too, which is Too Late to Die Young, Nearly True Tales from a Life. And this is a memoir which also touches a lot on eugenics, which was the focus of her essay in Disability Visibility. Really excited to read both of those books. I have another book by Derek Jarman, who I mentioned before. I was reading his book Chroma. This is a book about HIV and also losing your sight and gardening. It's called Modern Nature. The Undying by Anne Boyer is a memoir that is focused on cancer. Crippled, Austerity and the Demonization of Disabled People is by Frances Ryan. And if you don't follow Frances Ryan on socials, I very much recommend. Their writing is brilliant. They write weekly columns for The Guardian about disability. They're great. Frida Kahlo and My Left Leg by Emily Rack Black is about Emily's relationship with Frida Kahlo's art as an amputee. This is The Shape of Sound by Fiona Murphy, which is all about deaf culture. And Their Plant Eyes, A Personal and Cultural History of Blindness by M. Leona Godin is all about blind culture. We've got a collection of creative non-fiction pieces called Disturbing the Body, which is published by Boudica Press. Got a few more personal essay collections. So this is Corpsing, My Body and Other Shows by Sophie White. I think this one's going to be quite funny, but also obviously dealing with very serious topics. We've got A Mind Spread Out on the Ground, which is the Mohawk phrase for depression by Alicia Elliott. And this says that it is a collection of personal, intergenerational and colonial traumas that she and so many Native people have experienced. We've got Vagina Problems, which is endometriosis, painful sex and other taboo topics by Lara Parker. Pain Woman Takes Your Keys and Other Essays from a Nervous System by Sonia Huber. What Doesn't Kill You, A Life with Chronic Illness, Lessons from a Body in Revolt by Tessa Miller. We've also got a couple of memoirs. This is Breaking and Mending by Joanna Cannon, which is about her life as a junior doctor, but I also think about her own personal experience of injury as well. Then we've got Molly McCulley Brown's Places I've Taken My Body. The blurb says that this is a disabled and conspicuous body, a religious conversion, a missing twin, a life in poetry. And I've read some of her poetry before and really liked that. This is another book, like with Crippled, that is very much based in activism. This is Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice. We've got a book by Emily Ledoux, which is about language surrounding disability. This is called Demystifying Disability, What to Know, What to Say, How to Be a Better Ally. And then this memoir won the Barbellion Prize last year. This is Gollum Girl by River Liera, which is about spina bifida, art and community. And then finally, this is a book called Below the Edge of Darkness by Dr. Edith Widder, which is about her obsession with bioluminescence and also having a condition which meant that she was losing her sight. So it's about her fascination with light, linking disability with, marine biology, there we go, which are two topics that I am very, very interested in. Okay, so those are all the books that I wanted to tell you about today. I'm now going to get out of the stairwell and back into my flat. I hope that a lot of these books were of interest to you. I know I whizzed through the ones that I haven't read yet, but that's because I haven't read them yet, and I will be reviewing those in due course. If you're new, I would love you to subscribe. Please do stick around and check out the other videos that I have about books in general and also books specifically to do with disability and disfigurement. There are so many videos on my channel, I think over 700, so go and have a browse. And as I mentioned, there's also a link in the description box down below to Fight for Right, which is the Ukrainian organisation helping disabled people. I hope that you're all doing as well as you can be doing, and I'm sending so much love to all of you. I'll see you soon. Bye.